The Fossores Chapter House is the world's first headquarters for Christian ministerial innovation, bringing preachers, leaders, and innovators together to collaborate on new liturgies, resources, and responses to the challenge of our times. This podcast explores the ever-changing era of perpetual upheaval, in which effective ministry requires constant imagination, creativity, and change. Hey everybody, thanks for being with us on the Chapter House podcast. I'm joined by my good friend Jacob McGarry and my friend Dallas Flippin, a local pastor here in Jackson. And today's topic is broadly innovation and what happens when you come into a new context. And in my case, Westwinds many years ago. In Dallas' case, First Baptist in Jackson. And we're going to talk about how we navigate the new context and how we bring innovation to how we bring the new wine into the new wineskin, so to speak. So why don't you tell us, Dallas, where you're from and kind of your backstory, and then Jake, you.
Yeah. My family ended up in Texas. I always have to explain with the name Dallas that I was not born in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, though we ended up there. And so my family kind of moved around as my dad was a retail store manager, and so kind of were all over.
What kind of retail?
He was with Kmart while they were the big chain, and then was scoffed at for going to regional Walmart and then Home Depot.
Okay.
So they would just open up a new store, move to a new city. And my dad passed when I was small, and so suddenly we weren't moving anymore, and we just happened to be in Texas. And so grew up there, met my wife in undergrad, and we got married, graduated, and moved to Atlanta, Georgia to start grad school all in one summer, and did grad school in Atlanta, and moved up to Milwaukee to Marquette University for PhD studies. And so we kind of picked up.
And what's your PhD in?
So I did my coursework and exams and was ABD in Judaism and Christianity in Antiquity, which is their fancy way of saying Bible. And so I was very interested in narrative studies, particularly of the Gospels. Mm-hmm. And so I always loved story.
What is exams? Like your PhD in exams? Like.
So you take coursework and you take exams, and in our department it was set up where you had to do exams and coursework in your major field. So mine was in the biblical kind of field.
Exams like tests.
Yeah, but it was like written. You had to kind of like develop papers and memorize it well enough to write it out, during a session, and kind of hands are ready to fall off, and then go defend it to a group of faculty. Huh. Yeah, and so was in the midst of that and just kind of fell in love with our church work, and it was really great about being missional and caring for people living on the street and feeding people, and loved that, and loved my office research and innovation job that I was doing there, and started looking for vocational ministry as our kind of main focus, and moved to Jackson.
And you're always Baptist?
Yes.
My charismatic friends will never believe that I'm friends with the Baptists. I'm actually friends with many Baptists.
Yeah.
And I like many more Baptists than Baptists like me. So
yeah.
What do you do with that?
Well, I was raised Southern Baptist. I went to a Cooperative Baptist Fellowship Seminary.
Which is admittedly a bit of an oxymoron.
Yes.
Much like a sane charismatic.
Yeah.
I mean, a cooperative Baptist.
Well, and it existed because they were pushed out of Southern Baptist life. So out of exile, they took on the name Cooperative. Yeah. And then ended up in American Baptist Church, being in the Midwest. And so that's where we got plugged in, and that's technically where my ordination is, and the church I'm at.
No, it's going to seem like I'm poking fun, and I'm not, although everyone should. But, I mean, you hear about Southern Baptists or American Baptists. I'm just not familiar enough with the tradition to know, like, are there New Zealand Baptists? Like, that's in their name? I mean, I don't think I can remember any Saskatchewanian Baptists when I was in Western Canada. Yeah. I mean, are there...
Well, I think Baptists inherently are, after the fact, trying to figure out how to name their group. Right. You've got local communities that are doing ministry in their own city, in their own context. Yeah. And then they're deciding we need to do ministry bigger than our context. And so who are the other churches I can work with? And so like one of the bigger organizations is the Baptist World Alliance, but they kind of like work with regional Baptist groups. Okay. And so, there's some churches, like some in our state, that are dually aligned. And so they'll align with traditions that are predominantly African-American strands of Baptist tradition. We've got some Karen Baptist.
What is a Karen Baptist?
So we have a lot of Baptists from like Myanmar and Burma, and so kind of the Judsons that went over there and did a lot of missionary work.
Yeah.
So all these different kind of expressions that are all together, and we realize that we don't always look the same in our liturgy or
Right.
How church looks on the ground, but that we care enough about doing mission together that we'll figure out how to identify together.
Most of our black friends in town are Baptists, which always just is so. I always associate. I mean, all of my African American friendships prior to Jackson were charismatic. So I always tend to think of charismatic black churches, but here I don't think I have any charismatic black friends. Which is, so I make the mistake of being like, yes, do you want a tambourine? Oh no, that offended you. I'm sorry. It's very silly.
Well, when you think about Martin Luther King Jr. as a Baptist pastor, when people think Baptist, that's not necessarily where they go, but there's a really rich tradition of African American Baptists, and particularly National Baptist Convention and Progressive National Baptist Convention.
Yeah. Huh. Cool. Very cool. Cool. Jake, big news in your life recently.
Yes. I am 1 month into fatherhood as of yesterday. And
1 month.
1 month, 31 days. Well, no, 4 weeks plus 1 day. 29 days. Yeah, which is great. And I worked at Westwinds for 5 or 6 years, something like that. I attended for a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
Doing media stuff and live streaming, projection, all of the things that plug in, all of the things that talk to the internet.
What do you have any little ambitions or dreams for your daughter yet? Are you hoping that she's an innovator or a problem or a hornet nest kicker or?
Before she was born, I was very excited for her to be adventurous, and now I am terrified for her to be adventurous. So I anticipate that I will spend the next 40 years going, okay, on one level, I know I want you to be someone that goes and takes big risks, but also please just stay safe, stay in my comfort zone.
That's hilarious.
But I would love for her to do things that terrify me.
Safely.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought, Dallas came into First Baptist Church in Jackson here, and when I came into Westwinds, and sometimes when I hear you talk about your efforts to bring change to the church, they sound a lot like my efforts to bring change at Westwinds and my efforts to bring change when I was a music pastor. Because it's a hilarious thing. I don't care what the church is. If you're working to change it, they don't want you to change it. I mean, everybody will talk a good game about change, but change that's internally motivated. If I want to lose weight because I want to look healthier, that change is easy for me to accept but hard to accomplish. If my wife wants me to lose weight, that change is hard to accept and impossible to accomplish. And a little bit when you come into a new ministerial context, it's like telling your husband he's fat. You go hey, we got to change. Thank you. Also, you're mean. I experienced that as a worship leader, kind of leading through the worship wars in a church that I loved very much, where I was very well connected and had so many healthy relationships. And man, that was painful to try and lead that missiological change, which had all kinds of good reasons, and everybody agreed we should do it. It's just that the actual process of doing it was painful. And honestly, it was really painful to lead innovative change at Westwinds, which was a place known for innovation, which was so surprising for me that this innovative hub didn't want to continue innovating. How hard has it been for you at First Baptist?
I think that there's always that place of how do you get from the mind knowing that you need change, and often knowing the why, to in your spirit, in your heart, just being all in for it. And I think as many times you can talk about why of what would it be to see this person that you love, that you care for, the person that you've never met, but to have a passion for their experience of God and that they might encounter God through your work, through your ministry. And I think most people can get to a place where they, in their head, say yes to that. Can you give moments where that reality feels real enough that your whole spirit is turned over to it?
Yeah.
And I feel like when people hit that tipping point, they're usually all in for it.
Yeah.
But then you face that challenge of looking to your left or right and be like, wait, I'm all in now, but how do I make my neighbor get all in?
I'm all in for my idea. Strangely, they're not all in for my idea just yet. Yeah.
And I think that most people do want to see the same why happen. They still want to. They want to see people's lives changed and transformed. And we have to do a better job of figuring out how to cast that vision and help explain. When you're talking about worship awards and stuff, like, well, what does this have to do with making a change in somebody's life, and how does that matter here? And I think most people get there, but you'll never get everybody, and that's the challenge. Is a certain part of us as ministers wish we could have everybody always on board.
Yeah, we wish we were all linked together, unified heart, mind, and spirit, purpose. Yeah. What about you? I mean, I think, like, from my vantage point, you came to Westwinds at a time where all the big wars had already been fought, and you just kind of got to get into the slipstream. And part of me thinks the hardest changes you may have had to navigate are changing me. but what were there?
I haven't succeeded at that.
Yes, you have. Are there? That was a stupid joke. Are there moments that you remember where we were pushing a boulder uphill, or where you felt like you were swimming upstream, or
this is a really small example, but recently it was really helpful. The thing that's in my mind for change was in myself, in the way that I was going about how we run the live stream, where I had for a long time been pushing towards like something really dynamic, something really exciting feeling, and then partially due to COVID, we had to scale back a bunch and focus just on, let's just make it work. Like, just make it turn on and let people see what's in the room and hear what's happening. And let them, it was specifically this spoken word series where we realized we have to put the text that you're saying on the screen.
Yeah.
And
spoken
then people,
word series was when we liturgized entire books of the Bible. We were originally going to do 9 books of the Bible.
Yeah, and we did 3, I think.
Yeah, and then it was such a disaster the first week that, I mean, we salvaged. I thought week 2 and 3 were great, but week 1 was a very dark day. Anyway, keep going.
So scaling way back to just go, let's just let people see into the room, just like essentially a static window, but where they can see everything. And people responded better to that than anything else I've done. There's never been on the live stream. There's never been camera angles. There's never been camera movements, like big dramatic things that people responded to, as well as, oh, thank you for letting us see the words. Like, we're happy we can now read along. So that's the thing that's in my head, is like, okay, that was a change that I had to make, to go, it doesn't matter if Jacob wants to be film director, O2, or like, just pay attention to what people need so that they can feel ministered to when they're at home in their pajamas in bed, watching on their phone.
Church in the sheets. Yeah.
I was thinking, I do think my perspective on change is different from yours, because I more or less started my serious ministry career at Westwinds, and the big battles had been fought. And it was interesting listening to Ken Brewer, Dr. Brewer, this afternoon talk about having to get his small congregation to change, and they were very reticent, which I think is somewhat similar to your experience. It's interesting to like, change has to happen. Like, it will happen, or the church will die, and the church hasn't died yet. So change has been happening, and you can either have change as a last resort, where like everything else has failed and now we'll have to try something new, or you can have change as a privilege, which feels way more like the field that I have been able to work in, where I go, I love that I get to try something new, and if it works, I don't have to do it again. Like, I get to do it once and it worked, and I'll take lessons from it. But we're not. There aren't people beating down my door going, what happened to our, June 22nd potluck? It was so great the one time we did that.
Yeah, the sacred cows. Do you have, do you have a lot of those? Kindly, do you have a lot of those in your? Because you're in a more traditional context. I mean, I've been in your building, which is a beautiful building. I love that building. It's 200 years old.
Yeah. So the sanctuary itself is from 1871. The congregation from 1839.
Yeah. So Chapter House is in 1888. So we're right in the middle of where you are. Yeah.
Well, I think we've taking the positives or the blessings in the midst of the challenges that the pandemic provided was. Like, when we started, we have a lot of work that we're trying to do to help us connect with our neighborhood, of like, to be a downtown church. Like, what does it mean to be where we're at? And so we were working on a lot of things, but streaming was not at the forefront of that, of like, let's work on what we're doing here. So the pandemic allowed a whole lot of change to happen that it's like you have to happen. Like you have to change. You can't just do the same thing. And so we got to build all of that from scratch because it hadn't been done yet. And so it wasn't just, I think that the community really appreciated it because they had never been able to experience that from us. And each kind of added step of like when we got the lower thirds with the lyrics going and that was working well, that was so well appreciated. And so when we transitioned from pre-recording to live stream as our internet infrastructure got updated, we had a good number of volunteers to help support and run all of our tech stuff, which we had not had that team.
What are the demographics of your volunteers? Because I have an impression of the church, having never been there, but just from little things here and there, that I think of most of your congregation as being 40 or 50 and older. Do you have younger people, or is it older people running your tech?
I mean, I'd say that's our majority of our community. We did have we have some younger individuals on the volunteer team. And primarily, we have so many people like thinking about for my parent, for my grandparent. Like, I want to come help make this happen.
I want to serve and help out and bless my mom and grandma. And that's cool.
And it was opportunities that, we had a few people who had not been serving in any capacity who stepped up of like, here's something that's different than normal that I get to be a part of. And so it was really, it was a great thing to see how many people wanted to support us. Because like, I'd say our adults range is about 60 or so folks, and I feel like we had about 12 people show up for our volunteer training sessions, which is like a really large percentage of your community, but also a sustainable amount of people to be like, okay, if we're gonna have about 4 volunteers a week, okay, I think we'll make this work.
You're in rotation.
So that was really life-giving, I think, for us.
Well, it's super cool to have them have this sort of missional mindset of like, I want to look after my grandma. That's super cool. Because normally, in so many of my contexts, I've been saying to the grandma, we got to change in order to help your kid. So nice to have the role reversal.
Yeah, and it was like, people have fed into me so much in my life. Here's an opportunity of something I can do for you. And I think in the pandemic, people were looking for how can I help somebody, and this was just a new expression for someone to be able to help.
How can I help somebody without getting close to them?
Yes.
Yeah. Huh. I always think that the hardest thing about change is creating a culture of change. Taking a concrete church and breaking it up and making it fluid, or a concrete organization. And once you culture change, and you keep things malleable, you keep things pliant, you keep things fluid, then all the little changes seem like there's so much less work. Whereas if you haven't changed anything for 10 years, any change seems huge.
Yeah.
Change the bulletin, oh my gosh. Change the screens, oh my gosh, how could you? One of the sort of rules that I live by is to say we always change for the sake of change. Because everything changes. You change. I mean, we recycle every skin cell every 2 years. Your hair changes color. You grow. You stretch. If you're not physiologically, if you're not changing, you're dead. That's the only time that you're not changing. And then you're decomposing, which is its own kind of change. So any organization, any church has to change. But people love to say you should never change just for the sake of change. I think what they really mean is we should think through how to change, why we're changing, and change intelligently. But that's not actually what they say. And they often will use, we should never just change for the sake of change as a way of dismissing any valid change initiatives, because they go like, oh, I don't see the need for that. That seems haphazard. But really it's because they haven't thought about it. Or even if they have thought about it, they might have all kinds of non-rational resistance to it. Not that they're stupid, just that they probably haven't thought through why they're so resistant, those deep emotional issues. So I go, well, if you can pick that fight, no, we change. Let's change our branding. Let's change our advertising strategy. Let's change our liturgy. Let's change our service times. Let's change our environment. Let's change our approach. And those don't all have to be big changes. We don't have to go from serving the Eucharist every week to never serving the Eucharist. We don't have to go from only hymns to never hymns, but just little changes all the time.
Yeah.
What about you? What do you guys do? Have you tried to allow people to become more comfortable with change?
Well, what was interesting is before the pandemic, we had two different services. We had two different, very small services.
Yeah.
One more traditional, one more modern. They met in different spaces.
Yeah.
And so another kind of blessing through the challenge of this season is that we were just going to do the one type of service in the midst of the, as the video editor while we were pre-recording, trying to make each service happen each week. It was a lot of work. And I know so many people who had to take on extra roles. And so we had somewhat of a blended service in that, it was kind of one stylistic thing. Our worship leader leads with an acoustic guitar, and we've added our kind of a piano player as we are able to. But so there's kind of one voice. So if you sing a hymn, if you sing a modern song, it kind of has the same type of tone.
It all feels together. Yeah.
And so we saw a lot of folks that served and that worshiped in the afternoon modern service who were showing up to help the live stream at the 10 o'clock time. And so we've seen parts of that community come together in a way that I think's been really healthy for us. But it's not like it's everybody it's not everybody's preference the whole time. But I think people are on the same trip for the mission together. And trying to figure out how to prioritize that.
Have you ever tried to initiate a change other than those required by the pandemic? Have you ever picked a fight over turf and had to see it through?
Picked a fight? I don't know that we've had really super challenging, practical on the ground things. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of buy-in on a lot of things. I like to tell the example of we had a photo that did not represent our community very well.
Right.
It was right where the pantry lines up. So pre-pandemic, when we have hygiene products from the Jackson Personal Care Ministry that gives away every Thursday, and people would line up at the table, and there'd be a photo, and it was celebrating a moment in the church's history. It was their 150th anniversary, so it was about 32 years old now.
Yeah.
But the tradition was to dress up like when the church was founded. So they dressed up like it was 1839. But the person who walked by wouldn't know we're trying to dress up like 1839. They're just saying oh, this is who this community is. And just trying to bring in fresh eyes to talk through who are you showing people who you are? Because we could show more accurately who we are and how do we think through those things. And so there's been aesthetic changes.
Yeah.
But for the most part, our church has been in a life cycle where they know that they weren't on a sustainable path. And that allows for, okay, well, what are we going to do? And sometimes those choices are more universally loved, sometimes less so. But I think that we're not a size that everybody feels more defensive of maintaining. And we talked through, and I think that was one of the most meaningful things for our leadership team of, as you start declining in size, you want to figure out how to maintain things, and you're trying to persevere and keep the doors open, and you're but who wants to join you on that mission to keep your door open? That's just not enticing to the outsider. So it's we have to recover what brought life to us in the past of what was it? Yeah. So I think actually one of the things that's been the most helpful is I love going into our archives and reading our history and speaking to moments where they made transformation of look at their heart for mission and look at their heart.
You seem like such a good pastor.
Well, I don't know, but but we at the pandemic when it started, I went in their archives. This church survived the 1918 flu. What was the church like then? And so we read through. I wrote an article about the church grew in size. It actually had more giving the year that the Spanish flu kind of was happening. That they had the Red Cross in there helping make supplies and taking advantage of a moment and they challenged people. And so we talked about that. We've talked about moments where they built the education building. It was like they didn't just want a building, but like, and the pastor at the time gave this like speech of everybody's going to want to look around and celebrate each other today. We just built the building. It's like the work just started.
Yeah, right.
You know, and like recovering that vision that has been true of our community, and just it's our time to.
That's
step
so smart
up.
to be able to look back through the archives and say, here's who we are as a people. Here's the changes we made. What are the big changes that you can remember us making at Westwinds? I mean, you remember us because you seem like I envy your ability to look at the community, love the community, and say, hey, we're in this together. And I have often been described in very different terms, in very unflattering terms. But what about at Westwinds? What do you think of as the big things that we tackled?
It feels like in the last couple of years we've which I don't want to put words in your or Kelly's mouths, but it feels like we finished letting go of like all of Javo's stuff, the previous worship leader, the style of service he would plan, the sort of music that he would play. That feels like it's like it went from. Yeah, we still do some of that stuff. We still like that stuff, which is we do still like a lot of that stuff.
He was great,
right? But it wasn't totally us, and it feels like we made the transition to just no. This is what we love right now. This is what we have passion for. The musical choices, the liturgical choices, all of that stuff.
Music always seems to be so contentious, which is hilarious. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you can't, if you go on a road trip, we all fight about what we're going to listen to on the way. The driver wins or the passenger seat wins, or mom wins. But when I got to Westwinds, we were doing stuff that was like Southern rock sort of style. That was kind of typical worship. And it was still left of center. Like I think at that time, Chris Tomlin was really big, Passion was really big, and Westwinds wasn't really doing that on purpose, that style, but not those artists. And then Javo, when he hit his stride, he was doing real power pop stuff, and he was so good at that. I mean, he was right off of American Idol in the terms of like he can nail this tune like Chris Daughtry or something like that, which he'd probably throw up, or Fountains of Wayne maybe, or Kings of Leon, like that was kind of his wheelhouse. Adam Levine, and then he really got in a big folk kick, sort of Steel Wheels, or I'm trying to think of who are the other big, who's the like Mumford, that kind of deal, and he was great at that too. But in each of those changes, there was resistance. We had to do a fair amount of leadership for that, but also because he was our guy, you got to follow your guy. You dance with the girl you brought. And then but because it was always him, those changes were reasonably well accepted because we already loved him. So as he changed, the church would change with him, sometimes uncomfortably. I mean, I remember it being really hard for people as he transitioned into folk music because they were like, hey, I really came to Westwinds because of this amazing power pop you were doing, and now like folk is just different. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just different. Well, Kelly's got much more of an electronic style. She goes hard into classical music and hard into EDM, and of course that's a huge change from folk. That might not have been that big from power pop, but it's a really big change from folk. Watching her kind of come into her own has been big, and our church has done really, really well with that. I mean, people for the most part they want something different when they come to Westwinds, and the hardest thing for them is going, yeah, it's different. It might not be the different that I want, but it's different than other churches. I think for me, I've always played a little bit of defense for whoever's doing worship, which has been easy because as a former worship leader, I remember what it was like to feel like, man, I wish somebody had my back right now because I'm getting my butt kicked by very well-meaning satanic church people worshiping the dark lord of the netherworld and the guise of loving a particular music style. But I think the fighting for ordination for women, that was really hard. We used to be a complementarian church, and now we're an egalitarian church. And it took me 4 years of weekly theological debate to help our church transition.
That's one of the things I've loved about our church before I got there was they had 2 previous women pastors
Really?
in the last decade or so.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it was a church that felt strongly about that, and so I feel like there was a lot of good resonance of hopefully that they see things about my ministry that they find something that they can connect with, and I've found things about their history and tradition that I want to connect with. But like you, it's so challenging. I don't know that people realize, like, so whatever preference of style is happening at your church at the time, that you're like, I love all sorts of music, like I can worship in a lot of different ways, and it's not like whatever is this week is the sacred way of worship, but we tend to feel like it's like you've discounted my preference style, and what does that say about what you think about the way that I worship? And you're like, that's not really the message or the point of this. But I don't know how we help people not be so defensive, or I don't know.
Yeah, so wounded by it, take it so personally. Well, to that point, one of the things that I really learned how to do was to not energize negativity or complaint. Mm-hmm. Because when you first start leading change, and like when I was a worship leader, and people who used to be my babysitters would say mean things about me, it hurt so bad. You pay so much attention to it. So if a babysitter says, "How can you do this? You're ruining church," that hurts, man. Like that, you go like, "Oh my God, Lord, I'm so sorry. Have I really done that?" And then once you kind of come to terms with the fact that no, I haven't done that, then you go like, "She's awful. Like what a horrible human being you are to say that to me. You're supposed to love me. I loved you. And I don't love you anymore. You're terrible." And so then you kind of lead out of your wound. You lean out of your hurt. It toxifies everything. And if you talk about it, then she just wants to talk about it more. I say she because I'm thinking about a specific person who happens to be a woman, and then we'll gather other supporters, and it kind of grows and grows and grows. And one of the things that I learned in my tenure at Westwinds is like, if somebody complains, just don't worry about it. They complain. Maybe that complaint warrants a response. Usually it doesn't. If they have something negative to say, you can say, thanks for your feedback, or tell me more about that, or, but I don't ever, you go like, of course not everybody's going to like it. And one of my pastor mentors told me, he said, unless 80% of your people are mad, if you feel like you're doing what God is putting you to do, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. I was like, 80%? When we launched the youth center, a ton of our people were mad. They thought it was irresponsible, and we weren't well equipped for it. And I thought I was getting all these emails. That's why I called him. And he goes, "Well, like, how big's your church?" I go, 800 people. How many people are mad? There's probably like 20. And he goes, "Who cares?" And I was like, "What do you mean, who cares? This is 20 people that I really love." He's like, "Yeah, but 20 out of 800. Even if it's only 20 out of 600 adults." He goes like, "That's a really exceptionally high approval rating. Like nobody in politics gets that. Professional sports teams don't get that. The Dallas Cowboys don't get that." And once I realized that, then I was like, oh man, I'm giving all this emotional energy to a really small group of late adopters, and I've given them power to hurt me, and I don't need to do that. Now, I don't want to be a jerk to them. I don't want to be dismissive of them, but it made me realize like I was beholden to their grace, and until I could get them to forgive me for doing something that they didn't like, and then like me while I continued to do the thing that I thought was the right thing to do, I couldn't emotionally move forward, which was so crippling. Yeah.
I think the one of the bigger changes for us coming up, where I think most people in the space are excited about, but like, you're talking about sacred cows, like it's hard to make this change. Before the pandemic, we had started to remodel our chapel because it was a small space on our first floor, without having an elevator in the space, and for an older congregation, like it matters having that spot. Mm-hmm. And so we went into renovating it so that taking the pews out, making it movable furniture, flexible space that we can do all sorts of events in, but that it's also a small space that, particularly in the summer, because we don't have air conditioning in the big sanctuary, you've got an air-conditioned space, but also like that you fill a space that at your size, like you're excited because you're connected and close to people instead of really far apart. And so I think that now people are so edgy because we want to get back to normal, and we're longing for closeness, that there are people getting very excited about, I would like to be in the smaller space. Just give me a Sunday to be close to somebody and to worship together. But to not be in that one room, even for just a Sunday, can be a huge change. But maybe, again, pandemic-wise, we've spent a year away from that space. So I think people are going to actually love filling the space well and feeling like you're close to each other. And, it was very formative to me growing up that I had a very unhealthy church that, if you want to go down that road, but we lost about half of the congregation instantaneously based on a news event that happened about the pastor.
Oh.
And so they had just gone from a 300-seat sanctuary to 3,000-seat.
Oh.
And it came out the pastor had affairs with 6 or 7 women he was supposed to be counseling. And almost immediately, you're half the church, and then half the church to pay for this building.
Oh, man.
And to be in a church and know what 3,000 feels like, and to be at 1,500, you're like, it's tiny. Like, we're empty.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, it's not about how many.
Gone.
Yeah. It's not about how many. It's like the memory of the community as well as the space and the environment you're in. And so it's something I'm looking forward to, but also aware that it's something different. And I think about ideas of like, what is it to turn some sort of contemplative music on in the sanctuary space, that it can be a space of prayer, even if we weren't for a one Sunday in that space. But that's a harder kind of
spaces are really, I think, a really critical component of worship, because we leaders like it full. We want it to be full. We want it to have people busting at the seams, and we want filled altars. We want people on their face before God. We want people to be demonstrative, and
now it's illegal.
Yeah, now it's illegal. Yeah, but also, like, if you go into an abandoned factory and it's this huge cavernous space that has its own kind of sacramentalism to it. Mm-hmm. If you go into an underground canyon, into a cenote, or into a cavern, and it echoes, and that has its own sort of cathedral quality to it. And I think there's probably a lot of opportunities for all of us in the future to go, what happens when you got a 3,000-seat auditorium and you're limited to 50 people at your gathering? Mm-hmm. Does that have to feel sad? Or is there some way that we can sacralize vacuity? Mm-hmm. And say, all right, you have a lot of praise room right now.
You can hold flags in both hands.
Oh God, yeah. No flags. Yeah. And what are you most excited about in the future?
We are envisioning what it looks like for our next kind of mission, like for our community, and we know that we are not a program-driven community at our size and what we're at, but we want to figure out what our identity is in serving people. And so we're in the kind of still initiating phases of what that might look like later this year. And so, like, there's an excitement with the leadership team of like, what could we be really investing our time and energy into, and making that a real, not only just a service, but like an on-ramp to understanding who our community is.
Yeah. Meaning like community of Jackson, or like the church?
Like the church, that we're not just the worship hour community, like who are we, and living that out and having another opportunity for people to understand who we are. That's not just a worship.
Yeah. What about you? Well, go ahead.
I was thinking about, I don't remember which question you're on.
Say your thing.
But, I was thinking about the making the sanctuaries feel good, making big spaces feel good, and our sanctuaries before COVID were already mostly empty.
The top 80% of them, like vertically.
Right, and time wise, like they're there for, like, you're gonna build a giant space that's filled up 4 times on a Sunday. I think briefly we had 4 services on a Sunday in there. Maybe it's full all day on Sunday, and maybe on Wednesday night it's a little full, but it's still mostly empty space. So there's still tons of like if we can crack that, like to go, how do you make, how do we make it into a prayer space or a sacred space in all of the time that it's empty, whether it's empty because only a few people are there during a service, or they're there at 1 a.m. or...
I do love that about Catholic churches, that you can kind of just go in and pray whenever. I love that. Although I'd confess that even with the exception of maybe, Hagia Sophia, which is no longer a church, or Notre Dame, or St. Paul's. I mean, with the exception of the really great, you go in and it doesn't quite feel the way I imagine. When I see the church, I go, oh, this will be great. I'm going to go in there and pray. And then you go in and you're like, this actually kind of sucks. This feels like a basement. And it would be amazing if we could figure out how to make an evangelical church, or how to make a box church, or how to make a Walmart church, whatever, to make it feel the way that Notre Dame promises, or the way that St. Paul's promises. Because providing sacred space and teaching our people how to alter, how to make sacred space at home, how to make sacred space in their car, how to make space for reflection. Because getting into a spiritual mindset, getting into a God-focused mindset for personal prayer and reflection time with God is so much easier if the environment's right. It's way easier to pray at the chapter house when I'm here by myself than it is to pray at home. Even though I love my home, but there's something here that feels majestic. It's so much easier to pray in my office at Westwinds than it is to pray in the hallway at Westwinds. And so I think finding that way to make space sacred is a real critical component of the future for Christians and for churches. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? When was your church founded?
1839.
Okay, and how old was your dad's church?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, Westwinds is the oldest church I've ever been a part of, which is only 30 years old, about.
I don't know how old Westwinds is either.
I think it's 91, but sometime in the early 90s, I think.
Well, how old, because you were part of a huge megachurch in Brighton.
Yeah, and I was there when they started. So they were... there wasn't any history for me to catch up on. There was 2 people who had ministry wounds that led to them making some great leadership decisions. So then I was there when they launched 242, and then that blew up, and I saw the whole thing. And then pretty quickly I was interning there. My mom was on staff, so I was pretty heavily involved. Like a year after they started. So there wasn't any backstory. And then even just getting to Westwinds, which is only 30 years old, but getting there and seeing like, oh, these are all the art projects they've stored up over the years. This is amazing. The backstage space felt so magical to me because 242 was portable, so they threw stuff away. As soon as they were done with it, everything was thrown away, and they kept only their most valuable stuff packed into trailers. So like just the stuff of Westwinds felt so cool. So then you having a church that's almost 150 years old, or
182.
182.
I so badly want to root through your attic.
Yeah.
So what is that like to what are the things that permits you to do? What are I think I can see a lot of how that would be costly. I can see how that would be troublesome. But what are the things that you get from that? And then also, like, are your people, like, do you have people in your church who have been coming since, like, their families have been coming since then? Like, do you have that sort of history, or?
I'm not sure if no one has told me that their great-great-grandparent was a part of, like, the founding kind of teen number of adults. I did have the founding pastor's great-great-grandchild, send a picture of his gravestone and like send a picture of him and like just reached out, which was really cool.
That's cool, yeah.
And so like I went and found a photo that I had and sent it to her.
You, Dallas.
Yeah. And I had another one that
I feel like that. I hope this isn't how it went, but I imagine that came with like, hey, I've been praying a lot about your musical choices this Sunday, and also here's my great grandfather that founded the church, and
it's even the stuff that we do have. It's kind of like impressive. Like we don't have all of the oldest pastors' photos, but like there's a decent number of them in there. Of like and seeing like facial hair changing styles and
Yeah.
things like that. And the pastor that was there when the education building was built, he passed away at a younger age, and his ancestor kind of reached out, and I can't remember why she was in the area, but she stopped by, and so I went and took a photo of her next to the portrait of her grandfather or great grandfather.
Yeah.
And so there's little moments, but we have people who've been in the church for 90 some years, and but that's kind of cool that you've been there 90 some years, and the church is another 90 some years older. To be a part of a community that actually outlasts us.
Yeah, the 90-year-old learned from previous 90-year-olds how to be benevolently 90.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really cool.
That I'll tell you, that's what a funny thing about Westwinds is, like, I got there kind of for Westwinds 2.0. Well, probably, I mean, Westwinds started out hyper charismatic, Holy Rollers, Oral Roberts University, all that jazz. Then they made a shift to become like Willow Creek, seeker sensitive, because nobody was coming to faith in Jesus because it was too weird. But the people who were there loved it, And then they built this really cool building, kind of a postmodern cathedral. And they shifted again to being like an emerging church, which didn't really help them, but did gain them some notoriety, gain us some notoriety. And then I came in, so really for sort of Westwinds 4.0. That's a better way to say it. And I remember like being surrounded by so many people who were so resistant to change, but thought of themselves as innovators. Mm-hmm. Because they're like, no, we're Westwinds. We were in the New York Times. No, we're Westwinds. They write books about it. No, we're Westwinds. And I'm like, you're the old glories have so consumed you that you can't see the opportunities ahead of you. And I never thought I would find that at a young church, and now, it's funny because the most of those people are gone. Like all the people who were the backbone of Westwinds when I got there have evaporated, mostly because they didn't like me, or some. But it just so surprised me because I was hoping to build and grow the church with these people who had all these experiences, and instead they were like, it felt like they were fuddy-duddies. It felt like they were going, you and your newfangled ideas, don't you know this is the place where we write our prayers on flash paper and burn them? That's the way my granddaddy did it. That's what we're going to do here. Like, don't you know this is where we spray paint on the walls, you and your whatever. And it was such a weird thing to go, that's the same spirit that the people hanging on to some musical style had at the last church I worked at. Mm-hmm. That's the same spirit I see in baby boomers who refuse to morph out of a seeker-sensitive model when it's no longer effective for the mission. Yeah. And you're like, what? And it just really proved to me that the thing that we're doing now is never the thing. God's always doing a new thing. And if we idolize electronic music, or if we idolize narrative preaching, or if we idolize community groups, I mean, all those things are like, those things have to become icons that reflect God's glory, that show the visage of God to the world, instead of idols where we go, look at how cool our church is. And P.S. we've been in the New York Times many times since then, so screw you guys.
Even if you idolize like one avenue of innovation, even if you go, I love Westwinds because we always change what music we play. Yeah, and then, or I love Westwinds because the space always changes, or any one of those, or the we have a the teaching series is never repeated, or any of that stuff. Any one of those doesn't keep you from being open to the growth that can happen from changes in different lines.
And honestly, I go like. All of those little rules that we have, those are my rules to keep my spirit fresh. That because I'm currently leading Westwinds, they're Westwinds rules. I go, but they're not the 10 Commandments, and it may be like I have full confidence that if someday I felt God saying to me, hey Dave, today's the day to break your rule. You preach this sermon and 1994, I want you to go back through your notes, find it, and preach that same sermon again. I would go, Lord, I have this rule, and he'd go, I'm sorry, are you God? And I'd go, no, that's right. Like they're just like my own pet rules, and I would hate for somebody to come into Westwinds after me, and all of the people who I love, and to say to them, well, Dave never preached the same sermon twice. I'd be like, don't you dare do that to somebody. Like, let them be them. Let look, and not just let them be them, but let Westwinds be Westwinds. Let First Baptist be First Baptist. We're the people of God on the mission of God, doing the will of God, and that's always going to look a little different. I mean, Christianity is a forward-facing faith, a future-oriented expression of unity with God. And as soon as we start holding on, it's so destructive, man. And there's my friend Grady Yarborough, who's my therapist for years and years and years. He said the Christian life is at least a 2-to-1 ratio of letting go to laying hold. You gotta let go, and that's so hard because, especially when you have something great, you really want to hang on to it. I mean, the last, not the last year or two, but prior to that, the season of ministry we had at Westwinds was the sweetest, most enjoyable, most exciting season of ministry of my entire life. And it's been so hard to let go of that and just go like, it's not that season anymore. And it's a new season. And I really loved that one, and I miss it. And but it's been so hard to just say, right, shoot, okay, Lord, I trust you. Though he slay me, yeah, well, I trust him. Stupid psalm, stupid King David, dumb shepherd.
Go ahead.
I think that one of the strengths of seeing the loyalty, the faithfulness to and that continuity of community. One of the things that was different for me is many of our congregation members have not just been have experienced a bunch of different churches.
Oh, yeah.
So the vision of what church is what our one specific community has done, and so it can be interesting for transformation of if you had one experience of here's a church that did something differently, that's what it could look like of not there's less lived experience awareness of other styles, of other expressions. And so it's interesting trying to speak into that of us learning not just who we are now, but who God is intending us to be. Of how do you invite people to realize that something that feels new to you is the shared is the norm for most churches. And I remember they asked about screens because our traditional service hadn't used screens. Our modern service did in different spaces. And when they asked me about it, I was honestly, I have not ever gone to a church that didn't have a screen in my life. That's just the norm of the last 30 some years, that's regular. And so but that wasn't their lived community experience for most of their time. And, questions of when I value sheet music, what is it to not have sheet music to sing from, and helping people who are musical process that, because something you hold dear to and whatnot. And so how do you help people imagine something that's new to them, even if it's not necessarily
it's not new.
Yeah.
I do love, and you jump at that and I go, I love the fantasy of having church with no media. And I'm a media junkie. I love screens and scrims and lights and I love it all. It's so fun. I want to do all the things. But because everybody's trending more and more that way, I mean, it'd just be so cool to go, all right, we meet in this cave, just like Christians when they were running for their lives. And there's no bulletin, there's no sound system, there's no screens, but we're still going to sing, we're still going to baptize, we're still going to, we have no Bibles. Not that we don't use the Bible, but just there's no props, and you just think how cool would it be if you get in there and you go okay, we're going to have to learn a song today. Nobody knows it. So we have to teach it to them. We're going to teach them the words, teach them the melody, and it's got to be a song that everybody can sing, and then you think how cool would it be to just think about what you can do with your feet and your hands to create rhythm, if it's more like a field holler, and then how cool to preach in between that and then come back to the song, then knowing if somebody has a really beautiful voice to ask them to sing it by themselves. I'm just there's something, those constraints can be so beautiful, and what a cool opportunity to innovate in the total opposite direction of everybody else, not because of a refusal to adopt the norms, but because of an opportunity.
Well, our space is wonderful for that.
Yeah.
You know, like a space designed before your electricity and light bulbs and like, you know,
Was there no electricity back then?
because
When did they make electricity? When did things glow?
I'm gonna,
Both of you are looking
if
at
I
me
had
a
to
lot,
his-
and I
if I had to
probably it's probably somewhere in here, but
I don't know.
if I had to historically guess, I would be guessing like 1890s or something like that.
that sounds right.
Really? So really?
Yeah, that's
If
what I
only
would
we
guess.
had a laptop right beside me here. No, you can't. No, don't call. Who are you going to call? Thomas Edison. Yeah.
Yeah, but so like, you know, there wasn't speaker systems, and so like, echo in the space is useful because you can really boost the
Well,
vocal.
we rented. I don't know if you were there, but we rented your church for Holy Week services.
Oh,
one year.
that's right.
Yeah, where Aaron did music and who did you?
Yeah,
but
that's great.
It's such great acoustics. So cool looking. And,
Peter was the other person. Yeah, Aaron and Peter.
oh yeah, the piano player Peter Siciliano. Yeah. So yeah, it was a really moving service.
Yeah. And just to stand and like look at the arches up above, like think about like pre-power tools and you know like to build those kinds of structures. And so yeah, there is a sense of awe and reverence, like you were saying earlier. Like, how do you like recreate that awe in more spaces and more, and maybe not the same exact type of awe every time.
I think that this is the upcoming change that we're going through at Westwinds. When you asked what shifts I had been there for, I feel like the shift towards durability is approaching, which is something that I think the garden
making things and making them last. You mean like the labyrinth we're gonna make?
Yeah,
and
the labyrinth,
the Bible thing, and
which it feels like it's a change from let's do. We will still do cool stuff that's a one-off, but how can we build, you know, amazing spaces that are timeless, or create liturgies that you can go back to and listen to or whatever. But to be both timely and timeless.
Yeah, that spoken word series that we talked about before. I go that when we liturgized the book of Revelation, you know, meaning turn the whole entire book into a service. I go those are like the first times where I thought, oh, we should package this and make it available to somebody else, because somebody else would really enjoy performing Colossians or liturgizing Colossians. You know, somebody else would really enjoy Habakkuk in 90 minutes. Because it's such a, like, how do you not want to live the story of Habakkuk? And sure, maybe you don't sing the songs we sang, maybe you swap them out for different songs, but just to go like, oh, this makes sense that the congregation would say this part and the speaker would say this part. This makes sense that they would get volunteers to do these things. And so yeah, that's I did think that those are more those are more legacy gifts. Mm-hmm. Where we don't usually think about legacy. We think about freshness, and a lot of that's because we didn't have any money. I mean, a lot of our design schemes at Westwinds are like we make it out of plywood, and then we save the plywood and we use the other side of the plywood, and then we cut the plywood into strips and hang it so that we one piece of plywood lasts us for 6 or 7 set changes because we keep the lights low, and then we set it on fire at the end, and then only recently have we had the capabilities or the people to do things outdoors that last. Like we put in a cross garden at Westwinds, which has got like 100 crosses from all over the world, and it's a really small space, maybe
about
15,
as big as this room.
Yeah, 15 by 15. It's got a little pathway in there, and then you just pray. It's amazing. It's an amazing place to pray because you're surrounded by all these different images. It's inspired by the Hill of Crosses in Lithuania. But that was the first thing. That's the thing of which I'm most proud of Westwinds. And so that made us go, we should have more places to pray that are like not crappy and going to fall apart, that are not made out of plywood. We should have more stone, iron, water. You know, we should have places to pray that feel like they're going to be here in 100 years, which is a very different gear for us. Yeah.
I don't think the iron lasts 100 years.
Really? Plastic. We should just make it out of straws.
Ziploc.
Yeah.
We're gonna put the iron in Ziploc baggies to keep it from rusting out.
Iron really does. I don't know.
It rusts that way. Yeah. I don't really know either, but
well, Ed is a metallurgist, so he'll know. But
yeah,
you know.
We have a bomb shelter in our basement, so if you need a
really,
it's like a little half door. It's like halfway up in the room, but like you can store like supplies and like there were cots in there or something.
That's super cool. I'm so intrigued. Anytime I run downtown, I pass one of the fallout shelter signs, and I can't remember what building it's on, but I'm always like, that's so cool that's there.
There's really a fallout shelter?
Yeah, if you do like the mile run from CrossFit, one of the buildings right towards the beginning.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
The bank is there a County National Bank? I want to say that's what it is. But yeah.
You hide it in the vault with the money. You're like, woohoo. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks you guys for joining us, and thanks everybody for watching and listening. God bless you. We hope that increasingly God spurs something new in your spirit and inspires you and enlivens you in the process. And bless you, man. And honestly, it's been great to get to know you over the last couple of days here at the Chapter House. And we'll be praying for your church and praying for you that God will bless you because you're doing good work. You're a good dude. Yeah,
I appreciate you. Thank you for the invitation, not just here, but also the whole weekend. And it's been great to get to know you better and get to know everyone and think creatively and listen for what God might actually be inviting us all into.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, sweet.